In this series of videos I'm repairing and restoring this Sharp MZ80A vintage computer, and as you can see I've pretty much got this finished off. I've just been carrying out a few final repairs. The cassette drive would not reliably load tapes. It still needs a new main belt. It's got a habit of dropping off every now and again, but it wouldn't load tapes. It would start the load, it would identify the program, but then it would just continue indefinitely, and that turned out to be a poor connection going to one of the wires that feed back the data to the main board, and it was just making and breaking randomly and corrupting the data. And because it's a fairly simplistic encryption system on the tape drive, it resulted in the tape drive just running on indefinitely. So I found that, got that fixed. I've run a few test programs, a few RAM test programs, that sort of thing, and they all now pass. Had one issue with one IC, one RAM IC, and that was just a dirty pin. I had already cleaned them, but it was a dirty pin in the socket. That now all the RAM tests pass, so that's that sorted out. Could of course have thrown the fluke MZ80A on there and done a full test, but it is quite difficult getting that onto this machine. Although it looks like quite a nice layout, it's actually not a very nice layout to work on, because the main board is right at the bottom, and that's the thing you really want to get to, and you have to take everything else out to get to it. But the machine now seems to be working, so I thought in this video we'd just run a few programs. I had some tapes with this that came with the machine, but it did not include BASIC, which you need for most of those programs. So I found a copy of the BASIC file online. I found a converter online, there were quite a few to choose from, converted it to a WAV file, copied that to a tape, and then in theory we can now load BASIC from a tape. So we'll try that first. So this will take a minute or so, so I'll fast forward you through this, and hopefully we'll end up with BASIC running. Okay, so that took about 2 minutes, so not too bad. And what I'll do now is turn off the lab lights. That'll reduce the flicker that you're seeing, and I'll move the camera so you can see the screen a bit more clearly. So hopefully you can see that BASIC is now running. And what I will do now is, one of the tapes that was included was the BASIC tutorial, so I'll load that program and we'll see if it will actually run. Again, that will take a couple of minutes, so I'll bring you back once that program's ready to go. So that took about 2 minutes again. If we look at the program, so as you can see, quite a long program, and this is just really one part of a tutorial that Sharp provided with the machine. So if you weren't familiar with BASIC, this was a good introduction to it. So we'll just try and run this. And it takes you through the basics. There are, I think, 4 parts to this, and you can load each one in turn. And it goes from the very basics of BASIC and takes you all the way through to the more complex constructs. So it's quite a nice way to learn BASIC, and would have been a lot of fun back in the day when this was first brought out. And if you'd never seen a computer and were new to this sort of thing, it was a fantastic experience to work your way through this. So as ever, although there were some kind of business type programs and household accounts programs, that sort of thing, provided with this machine, one of the things that computers were always going to be destined to be used for was to play games, and this is no exception. So as well as the BASIC that I found online, I also made up a tape of some games, and I converted these and put these onto a tape as well. So we'll load the first one. So that's the first one loaded. That took about 30 seconds. And we'll try and run it. So you're probably familiar with this if you played games like this back in the 1980s. And this is quite a nice implementation, and it's quite a nice machine. It's a very nice screen to look at. It's probably still flickering from your perspective, but very nice, bright, clear, stable screen in real life. So that's the first game. I'll try another game, and this is where the tape counter comes in handy. I've got about 10 games on this tape, and I made a note of where each one starts, so I'll take us through to the start of the next one, or at least the next one I want to look at. You could just load the next one in sequence. Okay, and we'll try and load this. So, as you can see, this is the lunar landing game, so we'll try and run this. And I particularly like this implementation of this game. I think it's quite a nice game to play. And although it's nothing like a modern game, of course, these old games were fun, and especially at the time were kind of brand new things. It's something you didn't normally get to interact with televisions, and it was very interesting, very exciting at the time. So if you're not familiar with the game, the idea is to just avoid crashing into the planet that we're descending onto. And I have unfortunately crashed. And so it's quite a nice game. You have to avoid the debris from each successive landing attempt, and it is quite a nice game for such a basic and slow machines. So we'll look at one final program. The programs we've looked at so far have all been written in BASIC, so they needed the BASIC interpreter loading first, and that has to stay running in the background, otherwise the games won't run. But the last game we'll look at is written in assembly code, so it doesn't need the BASIC interpreter. So I'll reset the machine, and I'll put the tape in, get this game loaded up, and we'll have a quick look at it. And this is, of course, Space Invaders. So always like to try this on any machine that I get. It's nice to do a comparison. It goes to show different ways that the program can be written, but also how the machines compare in terms of the way they look, the way they feel, and what they're like to use. And Space Invaders always seem to be available on pretty much any machine that you could get hold of. This one's got quite a lengthy introduction that I have not yet found a way to skip through. There probably is a way of doing it, but I just haven't figured out how to do that yet. But it is quite a fascinating game, and it's quite nicely written. It is an assembly language, so you don't need the BASIC interpreter first. It just takes a bit longer to load. It's about 3 minutes, something like that, but not too bad. Okay, so we'll start the game. And as you can see, it plays quite nicely. So that's this machine complete. Apart from replacing the belt on the tape drive, this is now finished and I can get back onto my other projects. This is quite a nice one to work on. It's a pity about the broken case. Other than that, it has come up pretty much like a new machine. So screen's in very good condition, no screen burn at all, and it runs very nicely. So I'm going to leave it running for several hours just to make sure it's reliable, but a very nice example of one of these machines. And as with all Z80 machines, one of the things these were very nice in terms of experimentation was the in-out port. And if you had the in-out expansion or you just made up your own, these were a great deal of fun.